Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our deck workshop videos. In today's video, I'll be talking to you about the deck that I recently took to the Australian National Championship and I came second place with. So the deck that I brought was Wind Water Mid-Range Aggro. Otherwise, I call it Double Trinity, and the reason why it's called this is because it runs the two most high value Trinities in the game. So it runs Pain, Riku, Yuna, so YRP, and also runs Steiner, Garnet, and Zidane, the FF10 combo. So today's video is the first part video where we talk about introducing the deck, talk about card selection, and give you a general idea so you can get going ASAP with the deck and just try it out and give it a shot yourself. We'll be releasing a part 2 very soon afterwards where we go more in depth about the strategy, matchups, and how to really sort of get the most out of this deck. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the general idea of the deck is to set up a solid backup line and then sending in waves of cheap dudes to attack your opponents again and again and again. The deck really focuses around the two trios, so it focuses on YRP trio and the FF9 trio. So it's all about creating these forwards that come into play very cheaply or get you more cards and being able to send them in. And then once your forwards hit the field, it's about buffing them up, giving them a little bit of protection, and then just sending them in and preventing your opponent from really sort of proactively dealing with your forwards. Overall, in terms of the stats of this deck, I'd say that in terms of power, it rates a 9 out of 10. It's really quite powerful in the early to mid game. There's a lot of resilience on the deck. You can just send out a lot of forwards to your opponent, even if they're going on even trades. In a lot of cases, you're just going to win out in the long term. In terms of speed, I would say this is an early to mid range deck. It doesn't have the greatest tools for going for the longer game. Definitely, as we talk about a little bit more, this deck has no long game, so you really have to focus on your mid to early game to really sort of close out games. In terms of consistency, I would rate this 10 out of 10. There's very few decks where I would rate the consistency 10 out of 10, but there is so much search in this deck. There's so much consistency in this deck. The deck triggers off like 9 out of 10 times in most cases, and even then, it still has a very good showing. So, the deck is unbelievably consistent. And that's another reason why I took it to the national championships. During Swiss, they were all best of one, so you really got to rely on being able to trigger off and get your whole deck together, every single time as much as possible, and that's why I brought this deck. In terms of difficulty, I would rate this a 4 out of 10, so it's definitely not a difficult deck to play. It's quite a simple deck after you sort of got the feel out of it. Definitely, it requires someone that's a little bit more aggressive who knows how to play aggro a little bit better in order to get the maximum value out of the deck. So this deck is really good for aggro-intensive players that want to be able to play forwards and be the aggressor, who want to have their threats being placed on the board and require their opponents to have the right answers. It's really good, but also compared to other aggressive decks, it doesn't rely on the top deck intensive nature of other aggro decks. So you're not in a situation very often where you are committing your entire hand to the board and don't have a lot of longevity. This deck has a lot of strength in terms of being very resilient and can recover from a lot of setbacks, a lot of board wipes. The deck is extremely good in that regard, and that's why I think it's very flexible, very strong. So moving on to the deck itself. The deck runs 23 forwards, 17 backups, and 10 summons. So if anything, the summons are slightly tweaked higher, backups are about where they should be, and forwards are just slightly below sort of an aggro deck level. But let's look at the forwards first. So the deck runs 3 copies of Pain S, and this is a no-brainer. So Pain, obviously, if you're running Riku and Yuna, this Pain is a no-brainer. She comes in, if you have Riku, you untap 3 backups, and then if you have Yuna, you draw a card. Effectively, she is a free 7,000 power forward. So you literally get all your resources back for playing her. It's basically a free card. So I literally equate this to the equivalent of Pot of Greed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Literally, you have this card and you just get pure card advantage. So Pain, definitely, if you're running those two, you're definitely playing this card. Next, we have 2 copies of Pain R. So the rare Pain is also a free cost forward, and in this case, it's not that big. It's only a 3,000 power forward, but on EX burst and also entering play, it searches your deck for a Riku or a Yuna. So in situations where you don't have that combo set up, it does help you tutor out for the one that you're looking for, and it's just a little bit extra consistency in the deck. Also, it's an EX burst, so in the mid game, if you do receive damage and you do get a Pain, you can get an extra copy of Riku that you can use to mug and then cycle for another card. So that's also another handy thing about her. Next, we have 3 copies of Garnet. And the reason why we're running 3 copies of Garnet is because from recent testing and playing a whole lot of decks that use Garnet, I found that Garnet's passive ability in terms of giving you all your forwards plus 1,000 power is lackluster in mono water decks, simply because a lot of water summons typically only remove forwards or bounce forwards. So there's not a lot of situations where you're getting full value out of Garnet. And combining her with another color's summons really sort of helps push Garnet up a lot. So, and that's why she's kind of like an easy fit into a water wind build, because there are a lot of things in wind that sort of buff your forwards or give other little benefits, and then Garnet's able to really capitalize on those, but you don't have to commit to a higher cost summon that is used to remove forwards on the field, and you don't really get the bonus for the 1000 buff. Next is 3 copies of Steiner, and again, I've talked a lot about this card. It's a fantastic card. Usually it's sitting at 7000 power for 5, and it gets you one of your FF9 characters. So, it's great. It's EX burst as well, so plenty of times you hit it off damage, and you're just going to be able to get extra cards for free. Next, we have 2 copies of Light Zidane. So this Zidane is also, just another fantastic card. Typically, Zidane in like a lot of mono water decks is just going to be sitting at 7000 power. But in our deck, because we're running Maria, Zidane is going to be sitting at 8000 power. So when you think about it, you're getting a 2-cost 8000 power forward, and he's able to draw a card, discard a card, or reactivate FF9 characters. So this is another great card to add to the deck, and it really sort of builds into what the deck's got going for it. We are running only 2 copies for it, and the reason why is because we're running 1 copy of the Heroic Wind Zidane. So this Zidane performs a very similar function to the Light Zidane, in that this Zidane, when it comes into play, you get to look at your opponent's hand, and you're able to discard a card from their hand. So there are a couple of reasons why we run this card. So one is just that 3 Light Zidanes is a little bit too clunky, and especially for a deck that sort of wants to cycle and it's all about speed. Being in a situation where you have too many Light Zidanes in hand is just not good. 2 Light Zidanes is good. Having the 3rd Zidane as a win forward is great, because it allows you to use him to discard for CP when you need to, but it's also there for a target for Steiner if you ever do want to be in a situation where you can specifically target something out of your opponent's hand. There may be situations where you want to check your opponent's hand for options to see what they got hidden for you, or you want to be able to target something out that you know they've got in hand due to a search or something. So this Zidane is really handy for doing that. Next, we have 3 copies of Waka, and Waka is another card that requires no explanation whatsoever. He is probably Water's best forward. Unfortunately, in a lot of Water decks, he can't be played because he's also their 1000 power Water backup. So Waka, the forward, is really strong. 8000 power at 4 is standard of what you expect. Whenever he attacks, he's able to give a buff to any of your forwards equal to the number of forwards that you have. So in any sort of deck where you're having multiple forwards onto the field, Waka just gets stronger and stronger. And of course, this deck is able to just spew out dudes super, super fast. And Waka just really capitalizes on that. He also has another ability in that he's got status reel. So by discarding another copy of him and paying 1 water, you're able to make a forward 1000 power, and they lose all their abilities. And this is unbelievably good in so many situations. Any sort of forward that has ongoing abilities, or any sort of forwards that have enter break zone abilities, this will just like shut them down completely. Not to mention that you completely win in combat in any sort of situation where you use it in. So this is an unbelievably good card. 3 copies on any sort of like water something decks where you don't need to use the Waka backup. Next, we have 2 copies of Heroic Bards. And so this is something that's a little bit different from the other sort of wind water lists. I run Heroic Bards because it's a 5 cost, 9000 power forward. So that's typically what you expect. But when Bards comes into play, you're able to reactivate all your wind characters. So this is your wind backups and your wind forwards. So typically you're not going to really be able to capitalize on reactivating your wind forwards because we run mostly water forwards in this deck. But the simple fact that you usually in the mid to late game, you usually have 3 to 4 wind backups. So you're able to effectively play Bards for effectively 2 to 1 to 3, sort of like 3 to 1 level of CP. So he's a very, very cheap forward to play out. And then he also has got the bonus of reactivating your wind characters, which in a lot of cases will be stuff like Barbarisha or Pain. So here, he's unbelievably good. He's a very cheap forward. There have been plenty of times when I've just chained him, so played him, reactivated a whole bunch of backups, played Pain, reactivated a whole bunch of backups, and then played another forward, all in one turn without discarding any card. So this card is a really good value card. Being 5 as well means that if you do have 5 backups, you can play him without discarding any cards, and you do get a refund on his cost as well. So he's really good. Not to mention he does have an EX burst. So on the rare occasion where you do receive him as an EX burst, he reactivates your backups, meaning that you can get a Riku activation if nothing else, or it just gives you more CP or more options to use counter spells or that sort of thing against your opponent. Next, we have 2 copies of Dorgan. So this is probably one of the more meta type decisions in regards to the deck. So Dorgan is a free cost 6,000 power forward, so it's a little bit below the curve, but he does have ability where you can dull and remove him from the game to remove another forward from the game as well. So this is just like a sort of, it's a setup card in terms of you play this down and you have to wait a turn before you do get its effect, but then effectively he is going to take someone out on his way out. The most difficult thing about this card is that when do you attack with him, when don't you attack with him? There will be times where your opponent doesn't have a forward, so you may want to attack with him, but then all of a sudden he's not able to tap and remove himself to remove another forward from the game. He's in this deck to just sort of help the deck with more removal, especially sort of larger threats and any sort of threats that enter break zone abilities, and that's a reason, and that's because we aren't running Una H in this deck. So enter break zone abilities are just a little bit stronger against this deck because we don't have Una H, and so this is just another way to hedge that up by removing stuff like Golbez, removing stuff like Renoa. It hedges that up. Not to mention he's just strong against a whole lot of other forwards that are very resilient as well. He's able to get rid of the leader, so that's another fantastic reason to use him. So yeah, he's a good forward all round, but he is a little bit meta dependent depending upon how much you need a forward that can remove another forward from the game, no questions asked. Next, we have 2 copies of Barbarisha, and Barbarisha, this card, I think, has been slept on by some and actually really liked by some others. So the ability to come into play and make a forward's power 1,000 power is extremely good. That's all she does. At 4 costs at 7,000 power, she does take a bit of a hit to her power in order to get this ability, but there are plenty of ways to sort of combo this in. Any sort of situation where your opponent doesn't have, say, like a Minwu out, if you deal any damage to that forward, playing a Barbarisha will subsequently break it pretty much when she enters play. And this was really good in a lot of situations, especially when you're willing to trade your forwards in. So there will be situations where you have just say a rare pain on the field, and you don't want to, and you want to get her off the field in order for you to play the starter deck pain. This is just a good combo for it. So you attack with your rare pain, and in a lot of situations your opponent's going to block it. If your opponent blocks it, your opponent's bigger, your pain will die, and then you follow up with the Barbarisha play to finish off their forward. So that's just a really strong play. Most of our forwards, except for say Waka, are all expendable. They're able to come in really cheap, they get value the moment they come in. So if they're trading equally, then they're sort of meeting their target, they're hitting what they're supposed to be doing. And yeah, Barbarisha just combos well with that. Not to mention Barbarisha combos really well with Valifor. So it's something that we'll be talking about a little bit later. And yeah, it combos very well with that. So there's a lot of little combos with Barbarisha. In a more wind-focused version of this deck, I can definitely see her maybe bumping up to 3. But because we're sort of focusing more on the FF9 engine as well, Barbarisha is only down to 2. So she's really good. Try it. Really good. And it does force your opponents into a lot of sort of like mental blocks type situations where they don't know what to do. Next, moving on to our backups. We have 17 backups, and most of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory. So first, we have 3 copies of Riku set 1, Riku H. So Riku is, it's a 2-cost backup, so you can put her in for 1 discard first turn, and she basically doesn't really do all that much. She's there just so you can have a Riku on the field, but she does have a bonus little effect in that you can discard extra copies of her from your hand to use her S ability to cycle through and to discard a Riku to draw another card, as well as mill your opponent two cards from the top of their deck. So that's like a handy little ability, meaning that you want to get the Riku down, but if you draw extra Rikus in the mid to late game, you can always just sort of cycle her through for a small cost. She does have the ability to mill your opponent 1 card, and typically this does serve as a secondary win condition for certain decks. In our deck, it doesn't really serve that win condition because we're generally drawing a lot of cards, and so we need to mill opponents really, really hard in order to sort of bring our opponents back in line to our deck size. Typically, you're not going to be using this ability. It does have its very niche abilities niche uses in terms of when your opponent has any sort of ability that puts a card to the top of their deck, usually an EX burst, something like the new Heroic Lightning from Opus 3, or something like, Ephemeral Summoner that puts a summon to the top of their deck. If you can use Riku to mill that card off the top of their deck to sort of break their plan. So that's just like a handy little niche use for her. So yeah, she's otherwise not too spectacular, but we use her just so we can get maximum value out of pain. Next, we have 3 copies of Yuna. So this was a bit of a tough decision. I know a lot of YRP players, they were especially at Nationals, they were playing the Heroic unit. And there's a reason why we've opted to use the rare unit. So that's a 2-cost backup unit. And that's because for this deck, we want to get going fast. We want to be able to play our pains reasonably soon. I feel it's really annoying when you have to wait for your 5-cost unit to come in before you're truly getting value out of your pains. And that's my biggest issue. You don't want to be in a situation where you have to get one expensive card in order to get value out of it. You want to get those cheap cards in. You want to get a unit in for cheap so you can say you have a unit and then put pain down. Not to mention this unit is also pretty good by herself as well. So the main benefit in playing the Heroic unit is that it does lock out enter break zone abilities, and it also allows the decks to run Chaos Walker of the Wheel. So this deck so this deck opts on the other side in that it prefers to have cheaper water summons. And that's very handy as well. It doesn't have an EX burst, but that's fine. But again, it's just another cheap 2-cost backup. So this deck is all about consistency. You're almost always going to have a 2-cost backup that you can put in on your first turn because this deck runs 17 backups, and all of them except for like 6 are all 2-cost backups. So we're running 11 2-cost backups. Deck is ultra consistent. You're going to get 2-cost backup almost every single time first turn. Next, we have 3 copies of Artemisian. And so people have actually been questioning me a lot about Artemisian. He is an unbelievably good card in the early game. Simply put, you put him down, you get to mulligan your hand. Any sort of situation, any hand, any opening where you have Artemisian in hand, you can just keep that hand. You do not have to worry at all. As long as you have Artemisian in hand, you can filter out any cards that you don't want and selectively keep the ones that you do want. Especially in this deck where you really want to be focusing on getting your Riku and Yuna ASAP on your first turn. We want to get as much of it as possible. Artemisian is just another tool to help get us there much, much faster. In a situation where you have 5 cards and you don't have any 2-cost backups, you can mulligan if you hit an Artemisian and a Riku or Artemisian and Yuna. That's fantastic. You put an Artemisian down, pitch everything that's not a Riku or a Yuna, and you get another bunch of cards. This card is really, really good. If you play it as your first backup and you're going second, you're able to discard a card, put Artemisian down, cycle 5 cards. So that's effectively another whole mulligan that you can do if you don't have Yuna or Riku. But if you do have, say, a Riku or a Yuna, you can keep that and then mulligan the rest away. So this card is unbelievably good. Not to mention it's an FF9 character, so it is able to get a reactivation from the Light Zidane, and it also locks your Steiner in at 7,000 power the entire game. So it's able to get that buff as well. So this card's really good, especially early game, late game as well. If you do find yourself in a situation where you're looking for answers, you can play him down to cycle more through your deck. Next, we have 3 copies of Heroic Maria, or just Maria in general. This card doesn't really need much explanation. It is a 4-cost backup that gives plus 1,000 power to all your forwards, especially considering that this deck is able to put out a lot of forwards very quickly. Having plus 1,000 power on them just gives you a lot of extra value for the number of forwards that you have. And so this is a fantastic card. It doesn't have a situation where you have to divide it between your different elements. So it gives all your forwards, no questions asked, plus 1,000 power. That makes stuff like Zidane 8,000, makes your Pain 8,000. That 8,000 is a very relevant and significant number. It's able to trade a lot better. And because we're able to put a lot more forwards, it means that we're just able to trade significantly better in a lot of cases. So the next backup we have is 3 rare Aerith. And so a lot of people question me in terms of, why aren't you running Legendary Aerith, or why aren't you running Minwu, that sort of thing. So this deck sort of builds its core 5 backups as Riku, Yuna, Artemisian, Maria, and Aerith. So you can only have 5 backups in play. And so these are the 5 backups I've specifically chosen to build my overall strategy around. So the reason why I chose Aerith is because effectively we are really focused on this deck on building backups in. And while you have 3 backups in, Aerith effectively becomes free. She comes in and is able to reactivate 3 of your backups. So she's effectively free while you have 3 more backups. In addition to this, her S ability is extremely strong. One of the strongest S abilities in the game, in that for just a Dull and an S, you're able to reactivate all your forwards and make them unchoosable by all summons and abilities for the entire turn. So in a lot of cases, her S ability is effectively a counter spell, or like a counter choose type ability. And she's able to reactivate your forward. So I was expecting some degree of ice in the meta, and against ice and against ice or against lightning, being able to reactivate your forwards is really strong, especially against ice. where they might lock them down with freeze or that sort of effects. In addition to this, just being able to just stop an effect that's choosing your forwards. There might be situations where your opponent's going to be casting a really big summon or really big combo, and being able to interrupt that with Aerith is extremely good. The feeling of being able to use Aerith to stop, say, a Bahamut, or to be able to use Aerith to reactivate all your forwards when your opponent casts a Lyra is really, really strong. Not to mention, in a lot of cases, you don't necessarily have to have the second Aerith in hand in order for her to be relevant. In the fact that as long as Aerith is active and your opponent doesn't know what's in your hand, your opponent always has to question whether you do have the second Aerith in your hand to activate Planet Protector or not. And that's something that messes around with a lot of players. And so a lot of players don't know whether to play into it or whether not to play into it. And that's another whole mind game. And that's sort of why I really like this card, because it puts your opponent into a psychological sort of box in whether they're either really afraid of it or they just have to blindly play into it. And there'll be times where they'll just like make the mistake of thinking you have it when you don't have it, or thinking you don't have it when you do have it. And that's just like another mistake that you can force your opponent to make. And that's like why I love this card so much. And finally, to round out our backups, we have 2 copies of Archer. So main reason for this is because we needed just a couple of extra backups to sort of fill our backup line, because 15 I think is too low. I want to get it up to a like sweet 17, which is about right. So I put in 2 copies of Archer, and the reason for this is that our forwards are not inherently super strong. So most of them are just 7,000 power forwards. We have a Walker and we have a Bart, and that's pretty much it in terms of our strong forwards. So even though we do have Maria to give our guys plus 1,000, that's easily countered if our opponent plays their free cost backup that gives their guys plus 1,000 power. So Archer allows us to remove that equalizing force. Not to mention Archer is just also relevant in terms of like hitting a lot of other free cost backups, such as Minwoo, that sort of stuff. And the main reason why we play it is because it's a breakable backup. Because like I said, the 5 backups we really want to have is Riku, Yuna, Artemisia, Maria, and Aerith. Riku and Yuna is a must. Maria is pretty much a must. Aerith is something that just builds into the deck really well. So we want a backup that can sort of break and have a relevant effect that we can put in cheaply. So it was really sort of a decision of this or Scholar. Scholar is definitely relevant, but I feel that Archer helps solidify some of the weaknesses that the deck might have. 2 copies just means that we got a little bit extra backups for our turn 1 plays, and we can use it for a very relevant ability somewhere in the mid game, clear it out, and then put like our 5th backup down, which will usually be an Aerith or a Maria. So, moving on to summons, we have 10 summons in this deck. So we run 3 copies of Leviathan. This is a no-brainer. Most people assume if you're playing water, then you're playing Leviathan. It is such a good tempo play, especially when you have Yuna Rare on the field. It goes from a 3-cost summon to a 2-cost summon. So this means in any sort of situation where you are playing it against a 4 or higher cost forward that doesn't have like a enter field type ability, you're getting value immediately in that you are spending 2 CP and 1 card. So that's effectively like 4 CP to bounce a forward that costs 4 CP or higher, effectively. So in situations where you need to buy time and your opponent has played something like a Vincent or played like something bigger, you can use the Leviathan, bounce it back to the hand, and effectively you've equalized that resource. Not to mention there's plenty of times where you use it just to clear a big blocker on your opponent's side, and then you attack through with like 2 or 3 forwards. So that's relevant as well. It is an EX as well, so if there are situations where you're being out aggroed first, if you do hit a Leviathan, that's just a big tempo swing back into your favor. So this card is good all round in almost every situation. Next, this deck runs 3 copies of Chuchulain the Impure. Typically, I've been on the fence a little bit with Chuchulain. So, for 4, it feels like it's kind of a big investment. Even though you do get a card back, you do have to commit a lot of resources down to it first. And with Yuna Ara, making it a 4-cost summon to a 3-cost summon, just makes that cost a little bit easier to handle. It means that you can discard a card and you tap 1 back up in order to use it. It's a little bit cheaper and it does net your card back. In a lot of cases, it's going to be used to give your opponent anywhere between 2 to like 4k difference. It's generally an offensive card. You're using this when you're attacking your opponent and your opponent's got a whole lot of double backups. The fact that it draws you cards is another handy thing as well. It just allows you your like 7,000, 8,000 power forward to get over your opponent's like big guys every now and then. We're running 3 copies because as an EX burst, it's great. It gives you a free card if it does nothing else, and it helps you to get over your opponent's forwards. Not to mention, this deck runs a lot of combat tricks, and the reason why we run a lot of combat tricks is because we want our opponent to feel very unsafe whenever they're attacking us or whenever they're blocking us. And this plays more into the mind games. All these situations come into whether your opponent thinks you have an answer or not, and you've got so many answers to so many things while having relevant threats on the board. Next, we have 2 copies of Sylph. So Sylph is a 1-cost wind summon that reactivates one of your forwards and gives all your forwards plus 1,000 power for the turn. So this combined with Garnet is very relevant in that you play Sylph, you reactivate a forward, and you give all your guys effectively 2,000 power buff all across the board, which is really, really handy ability. So this summon has really sort of 2 relevant aspects to it. So one is the combat pump. So if you do need to give plus 1,000 power to your guys to either get out of range of a nuke spell or to help them trade or to get over combat, that's one thing you do. But also being able to reactivate your forwards is really handy. So you can attack with something strong, say with like a Bart's, or Pain or something. Attack with them, your opponent doesn't block, and then when your opponent tries to attack you back, if you don't have any sort of forwards active, you can always use Sylph to reactivate your forwards and then block their attacker. And so that, again, is just like another mental game you can play with your opponent. Like, all your forwards are dull, your opponent can attack you, but is it safe to attack you, right? And Sylph plays into that very well. Not to mention, it's always, like, very handy against any sort of, like, ice or lightning situation where they dull your forwards. You can always reactivate them and, yeah, be able to block forwards. Against more smarter opponents, it's your opponent will probably plan around it a little bit better. But against opponents that sort of like don't consider what you may have and all these sort of things, then Sylph is generally a very, very good card and helps you out in a lot of situations. And finally, to round out our summon line, we have 2 copies of Starter Deck Valor or Valor S. So Valor S is a 2-cost summon that deals 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forwards, and if you control Yuno, reactivates all your backups. So this is a value card, so any situation where you've got backups open and you've got a Yuno on the field, Valor pretty much is played for free, and 3,000 damage to all your opponent's forward. Now, 3,000 damage isn't a lot of spread. Definitely it is handy to be able to hit some of those like pesky 1-cost forwards that are 3,000 power, such as Snow and so on. So that's one handy aspect to it. The fact that it also reactivates all your backups is like really handy in that it doesn't effectively cost anything. So, again, it's just another way for you to reactivate your backups. So sometimes you can actually use it as just a way to reactivate backups. But furthermore, it does combo into a lot of things. So any sort of situation where you're using Valor to put damage on your opponent's forwards, they're now enraged to be destroyed by Barbarisha's effect, or to be destroyed by Waka's S ability, because it makes their power 1,000. If they've already got, say, 3,000 damage on them, that puts them down to 1,000, to a forward 1,000 power, and then they've already accumulated 3,000 damage, so they break immediately. So there have been plenty of times where I've comboed in, say I have 3 backups on field, and my opponent has something big, like an 8,000 power forward, like Vincent or something, right? So I have 3 backups on field, I tap all 3 to put an Aerith down, tap all 3 to put Aerith down, reactivates those 3 backups, I cast Valor, deal 3,000 damage to my opponent's Vincent and Yuffie, reactivates all 4 of those backups, I tap all 4 of those backups, put a Barbarisha in play, break the Vincent. So effectively I've discarded no cards whatsoever, and I've broken one of my opponent's forwards, and I've got a Barbarisha out, like a 7,000 power forward onto the field as well. So this card combos in with a lot of things. There have been times where I've used it to deal 3,000 damage to my opponent, reactivate my backups. Now I've got the one water that I need in order to use Waka's Status Shield's ability, cast it using that backup, and then break it forward. So this card is really versatile. Again, it's another card that's an EX burst. I think all our summons are EX burst. So dealing damage to this deck is actually a very risky play. This deck has a lot of EX burst, so that's why we're not too worried about receiving some early damage. Because because we need to set up Riku and Yuna, because your opponent is fighting a really steep uphill battle against you because you've got so many very quality EX bursts in this deck. So that's our Wind, Water, Mid-Range Aggro deck, Double Trinity. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope I've sort of given you a sort of nice little sneak peek or a nice little taster in terms of like what this deck is all about. I definitely do recommend you guys try it, build it, give it a shot, and tell me what you guys think. Send me any messages if you have any questions on the deck. We will be putting a part 2 video out on this very, very soon. Definitely not as long a gap as last time, because last time I was a little bit busy with nationals, that sort of stuff. I'll get this part 2 done really soon, where we talk more about the in-depth strategy of this deck, how to play it, how to deal with matchups, and sort of metagaming, that sort of stuff. Alright, thanks a lot for watching, guys. Grand J out.